From the very first intro of the game, it is obvious that Bloodborne is a horror game. Yharnam is a city that is defined by its gothic architecture and blood-stained streets. But investigating through these creatures reveals that the true horrors are found in the literal erasure of their humanity. These creatures have lost the essential traits that once defined them as people. It begins with the loss of posture, where citizens are banned in an upright stance to crawl like rabid hounds. It continues with the loss of voice, as human speech is replaced by the layered guttural screams heard in the scourged beasts. Finally, it ends in a total loss of form seen in the engorged parasitic anatomy of the bloodlickers. The architecture of Central Yharnam acts as the true first antagonist of the hunt, shifting the grounded medieval theme of earlier titles into a claustrophobic Victorian nightmare. It is a literal maze where the Great Bridge and the Tomb of Odin serve as the only paths to the cathedral ward. Yet the Healing Church has seen fit to lock these gates, trapping the residents in a pressure cooker of infection and blood. Within this district, locations like Yosefka's clinic suggest a history of medical research and blood administration that has long since devolved into madness, leaving the streets to be patrolled by citizens who have lost their humanity but retained their torches. But there is one more horror which will surprise anyone coming from the lands of Dragon Lake and Lodrin, who are accustomed to the slower pacing. The entrance of the cleric beast remains one of the most staggering moments in the genre. As the player treads the silence of the Great Bridge, the quiet is shattered by a staggering display of raw, bestial power. A colossal, malformed entity leaps from the high balcony of the cathedral ward, landing with a bone-shaking weight that instantly sets the tone for the rest of the game. This is the Cleric Beast, an initiation into a world where the monsters are no longer slow, but are aggressive and frantic. The design of the Cleric Beast is heavily rooted in the anatomy of the Wendigo, a figure of Algonquin folklore that represents insatiable greed and the total corruption of the human spirit. The beast appears emaciated to the point of death, its ash-gray skin pulled so tightly over its ribs that the skeletal structure seems ready to burst through. This visual emaciation suggests a canine hunger, a hunger for blood that remains unsatisfied, no matter how much the creature consumes. Its head is adorned with a massive set of antlers, a natural crown that creates a disturbing look. I believe this specific visuals, like the rib cage and the antlers, carries a DNA that clearly migrates into From Software's later work. If you look at the elder grooves of the Farron Swamp in Dark Souls 3, the inspiration is undeniable. They share that same silhouette of a body that has been stretched and hollowed by a corruptive force, using the antlers as a jagged, natural crown to signify a status that is now purely bestial. The horror of the Cleric Beast is anchored by its sound design, specifically its high-pitched, piercing shriek. Unlike a deep, guttural roar of a predator which signals strength, high-frequency screams like this trigger an immediate fight-or-flight response in the human brain. It signals instability and physical agony. It tells the player that the creature is not just a threat to them, but a threat to itself, trapped in a body that is constantly snapping and reforming under the pressure of its own body. One of the most striking physical details is the asymmetry of its limbs. Its left arm is significantly larger and more heavily furred than its right. In Yharnam, those who sought transcendence through blood often found their bodies betraying them, starting from the left side, the side historically associated with the impure. The lore of the Cleric Beast is anchored by a single, chilling sentence found on the Sword Hunter badge. Clerics were the ones who transformed into the most hideous beasts. The holy blood administered by the church did not react randomly. It responded to the internal state of the host. Those with the highest religious standing, those who possessed the most insight and faith, suffered the most violent and macroscopic transformations. Their internal will to reach divinity acted as a fuel for the beast scourge, resulting in creatures like the cleric beasts that tower over the common werewolves of the streets. The significance of the cleric beast is anchored by the tools it leaves in its wake, particularly the Kirkhammer. This weapon is a manifestation of the Healing Church's dogma, a heavy, immovable set of principles designed to silence any opposition. While the weapon begins as a silver sword of human finesse, it ultimately slots into a massive stone slab, transforming into a blunt object used to command absolute authority. The church did not value subtlety in its hunters. It valued a cleansing force that could flatten the scourge under the sheer weight of institutional belief. When we investigate the cleric beast's massive, distorted frame, we are witnessing this dogma made flesh. The creature's skeletal, overextended limbs and that massive, pulsating left arm are the physical results of a crushing faith that has finally broken the human skeleton. It is as if the weight of the church's secrets and the volatility of the old blood became a burden so heavy that the body had to mutate into a horrifying creature to keep from collapsing under its own history. The lopsidedness of that left arm, which is a chaotic, fair-matted limb, used like a stone block essentially, directly mirrors the transformed state of the Kirkhammer. The identity of this beast, in particular, remains one of the most debated records in the city's history. While data-mined files from the alpha version of the game point toward a Bishop Hebert or Father Norbert, the final version of the game offers a more subtle candidate: Old Hunter Henriette. You see, Henriette can be summoned within the Cathedral ward to help the player fight Vicar Amelia, but the evidence linking her to the cleric beast is found in her equipment. She wields both the Kirkhammer and the repeating pistol, the exact items unlocked by the badge found on the Great Bridge. There is a tragic idea that Henriette, a hunter dedicated to the church's sword branch, may have been the very sentinel stationed on the bridge to prevent the infection from spreading, only to become the very nightmare she was meant to guard against. The Great Bridge itself serves as a grim piece of evidence in this investigation. It is a literal dead end filled with the wreckage of overturned horse-drawn carriages and the remains of hunts that failed long before the player arrived. The most telling detail, however, is the massive iron gate at the bridge's terminus. It is locked from the side of the cathedral ward, signifying that the elite of the Healing Church did not merely retreat. They abandoned their own. This suggests a calculated cruelty on the part of the church leadership. They were perfectly willing to trap a high-ranking cleric on that bridge, knowing the inevitable result. My personal theory is that the church viewed these early failures not as tragedies to be averted, but as a testing ground for territorial defense. They didn't want to cure the cleric beast. They wanted to measure the limits of the human frame, observing how long it could withstand the pressure of divine blood before it ceased to become the beast. On that bridge, the cleric was stripped of their humanity to become a 10-story guard dog, ensuring that the unclean masses of the lower city could never reach the sanctuary of the ward. This transition leads directly to the creature's most famous vulnerability: its extreme weakness to fire. This mechanical trait brings us to the frozen hearts theory, which finds its roots in the same Algonquin folklore that inspired the beast's design. In those myths, the Wendigo is said to possess a heart made of literal ice, a physical manifestation of its lack of empathy and its insatiable selfish gluttony. In the world of Bloodborne, the beasts of Yharnam represents a similar spiritual winter. As these individuals discard the warmth of the human community and the heat of shared empathy, in favor of a solitary, obsessive addiction to blood, their internal temperature metaphorically and perhaps physically drops. They become stagnant and cold, existing in a state of permanent hunger that can never be satisfied. Fire, then, is the only thing that can sanitize this rot. The flames represent the very heat of humanity and the light of reason that these creatures have long since abandoned. When the cleric beast screams as it is set ablaze, it is the sound of existence being violently thawed by the one thing it can no longer tolerate. It stands as a screaming monument to the hierarchy of Yharnam. The higher you stand with the pillars of the church, the more blood you are given. The more blood you are given, the colder your heart becomes. Descending from the great bridge and passing through the stagnant aqueducts leads to a sunken graveyard known as the Tomb of Odin. This location is named after a formless Great One, an entity consisting only of voice and blood. The environment here is defined by weathered headstones and iron fences that have been bent and broken, creating a claustrophobic arena that limits movement. In the center of this rot stands Father Gascoigne. He's an experienced hunter from a foreign land who earned the title of father within a separate clergy before coming to Yharnam. His arrival was likely prompted by a search for the city's legendary blood healing, a decision that eventually led him into the service of the Healing Church. The first thing to observe about Gascoigne is his physical appearance. He wears the Gascoigne set, which includes a dingy scarf that is actually a holy shawl and a symbol of the Healing Church. His attire is stained dark with soot and blood, giving off what the item describes as pungent and beastly stench. Perhaps the most striking detail is the blindfold. In the world of Yharnam, eyes are the medium for insight and the perception of eldritch truths. By covering his eyes, Gascoigne is physically rejecting the world he can no longer understand. However, the blindness is also metaphorical. He has succumbed to blood drunkenness, a state where the hunter is intoxicated by the act of killing. When you enter the arena, you see him hacking mindlessly at a pile of corpses. He's not fighting a threat, he is butchering remains. This intro sequence proves that he is at the absolute brink of transformation. He's mentally blinded, unable to recognize the player as a fellow hunter. Instead, his dialogue confirms his shattered perception.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
To Gascoigne, the entire world has become a shop of beasts, and he's the only butcher left. He does not see a human being. He sees a monster that hasn't finished turning yet. Despite being your own kind, Gascoigne begins to fight with an aggressive vigor that exceeds human limits. He uses a hunter axe and a modified hunter pistol. His weapon work is sophisticated but desperate. He holds his axe with the blade pointed to the right, a stance different from the players, and he uses an uppercut swing that emits sparks as the steel grinds against the stone floor. This indicates a lack of concern for the tool's longevity. He's hitting the ground with enough force to destroy the weapon just to ensure he hits his target. His firearm behaves like a blunderbuss, using a break-action reloading mechanic after every shot. He fires the weapon immediately after combos or dodges, showcasing a predatory rhythm designed to catch the player in a state of exhaustion. The psychological layer of this encounter is revealed through the tiny music box quest line. The item description identifies it as a cherished memento of a hunter's daughter playing a festive air shared by Viola and Gascoigne. When played during the battle, Gascoigne winces and clutches his head. He mutters to himself in a muffled groan. This reaction is a high-level investigative clue. It proves that the human father is still conscious beneath the bloodlust. The melody triggers a spike of memory that causes physical pain, a clash between his beastly instincts and his human past. If used too many times, the psychological trauma accelerates his collapse, causing him to transform prematurely. The transition to his second phase occurs when he extends his axe into its two-handed form. He gains hyper armor on his attacks, meaning he will no longer flinch when he is struck. He moves with a rhythmic, twitchy aggression. The final phase, however, is a total biological explosion. His bones snap and rearrange with a sickening crunch. He discards his humanity and his clothes, turning into a massive, wolf-like creature. His posture shifts from an upright man to a hunched predatory stance. His mouth hangs wide and visceral, revealing teeth that have grown into jagged fangs. His hair is a matted, bloody mess, and his hands have turned into gruesome claws. In this beast form, Gascoigne displays a level of athleticism that is impossible for a human. He performs massive jump attacks, leaping across the graveyard with terrifying speed. He uses his claws to swipe and literally cut the player into pieces. This transformation into a scourged beast marks the final erasure of his identity. He has traded his title, his history, and his family for the raw vigor of the beast. My personal observation is that his speed in this form is a direct result of his experience as a hunter. The beast scourge took his existing skills, his timing, his aggression, his stamina, and amplified them into something monstrous. The environmental storytelling tells the final half of the tragedy. On a nearby roof lies the body of Viola, Gascoigne's wife. She's carrying the red jeweled brooch, a gift from her husband. She went out into the night to find him, hoping the music box would draw him home, as it had many times before. In his blood-drunken state, Gascoigne likely killed her himself. He did not recognize his wife. He only smelled the blood. His mid-fight dialogue reinforces this sensory overload.
What's that smell? The sweet blood. Oh, it sings to me. It's enough to make a man sick.
He experiences a form of synesthesia where the scent of blood becomes a strong and divine melody that drowns out the festive air of the music box. Cut content and alpha versions of the game provide even more depth into his character. Originally, Gascoigne was meant to be an NPC helper who would meet the player on the Great Bridge. He had dialogue that showcased a man struggling to remain sane.
Men leave as hunters and return as beasts. Let there be no doubt. If it moves, you can be sure it's a beast. And even if it doesn't, well, don't take any chances.
This unused dialogue reveals a deep paranoia that eventually consumed him. Furthermore, an unused deathline for the hunter had Gascoigne saying,
Sick creature. May you rest in peace, Umbasa.
The word Umbasa is a direct reference to the religious expression in Demon Souls, suggesting that the Healing Church's origins were once linked to a more traditional, perhaps even holy, faith before the blood corrupted everything. The sound design of Gascoigne's final phase provides the most haunting evidence of his lingering humanity. When he completes his transformation, he does not emit the triumphant territorial roar of a natural predator. Instead, he produces a specific elongated scream of misery, a harrowing "ah" that carries the unmistakable cadence of physical and psychological pain. The scream is a vital clue in the investigation of his state. A standard beast in Yharnam roars to intimidate or signal aggression. But Gascoigne's vocalizations sound like a man being burned from the inside out. It is a raw, vibrating cry of agony that suggests his voice cords are still human, even as the neck they inhabit stretches and thickens into a bestial shape. The sound is forced, as if the act of breathing in the distorted body is a violation of his original anatomy. It serves as an auditory record of a person who is fully conscious of their own desecration. This specific aha sound changes the nature of the fight. It reframes the encounter from a battle against a monster into a mercy killing of a man in total collapse. The misery in his voice connects directly to the psychological trauma triggered by the music box earlier in the fight. If the music box showed that his mind was still reachable, the scream shows that his mind is currently experiencing the maximum threshold of human suffering. This scream of misery finds its resolution in his final moments. The transition from that pained, elongated aha into the whispered, "Forgive me," as he dies, suggests that pain only ends when the beast's heart stops beating. The sound design confirms that the beast's scourge traps the man within a cage of muscle and rage, forcing him to witness and vocalize his own tragedy until the hunter provides the only available cure. This final moment of clarity suggests that the death of his physical beast form allowed his human mind to briefly resurface. He remembers Viola, his daughters, and his partner, Henrik. He realizes the extent of his failure. Gascoigne is a mirror of the player's potential future. He shows that the hunt is a cycle of addiction that strips away every human tie, whether it is of family, dignity, and sanity, until only the blood remains. He is the first mandatory boss because he is the most important lesson in Yharnam. The most dangerous beast isn't the one born from a myth, but the one born from a man who used to be your friend. To reach the heart of Yharnam is to descend into a geographical and spiritual basement known to the residents of the upper city as the Valley Hamlet. This district was once a thriving center of the Healing Church's early ministries. Today, it is a church skeleton of a town, abandoned and set to the torch to contain the ashen blood. As we push through the soot-choked streets, past the crucified beasts that line the walkways, we arrive at the Church of the Good Chalice. At the end of the aisle, where one would expect an altar of hope, we find a creature that serves as the final proof of the Healing Church's earliest failures. This is the blood-starved beast, and investigating through it reveals the true horrors. Blood-starved beast reveals a body that has been repurposed by suffering. The torso is the most striking feature. It is not rounded or muscular like the beast we saw in central Yharnam. Instead, it is flattened, possessing the width and thickness of a wooden plank. This suggests a total loss of internal volume, as if the organs have shriveled or been removed, leaving only a skeletal frame and a thin layer of muscle. The ribs are not just visible, they are jutting out against the skin at violent, sharp angles, indicating a state of emaciation that should be terminal. Perhaps the most visceral detail of its design is the massive flap of reddish skin that appears to be wrapped around the beast from the inside out. This honestly does not look like a natural growth. It looks like mutilation, something that mirrors the blood eagle, the legendary Viking method of execution. In that practice, the ribs were separated from the spine and the skin was pulled back to resemble wings. In the blood-starved beast, this skin flap functions as a permanent shroud. It covers the head and drapes over the back, perpetually wet with a dark toxic fluid. It gives the creature the appearance of a victim who survived their own flaying, forced to walk through the world while wearing their own hide as a garment. The hind legs and the pelvic region are located unnaturally low, almost dragging across the stone floor of the church. This creates a silhouette that is remarkably similar to the deep accursed from Dark Souls 3, suggesting that the design of the blood-starved beast was so eerie that it might have carried some form of inspiration from the design of future From Software monsters. If you manage to look beneath the skin flaps that mask the creature's face, you find a skull that carries a profound human residue. Unlike the aggressive, forward-slanting brow of a natural predator, the eye socket of the blood-starved beast possesses a negative tilt. They slant downwards toward the outside of the face, an anatomical configuration that mimics a permanent expression of sorrow and agony. It is a frowning skull, a bone-deep record of the misery that accompanied its transformation. The teeth provide a crucial investigative clue regarding the creature's age. Several of the fangs are overextended, growing so long that they pass the chin and reach toward the chest. In the animal kingdom, we see this in the babirusa or other wild boars. These animals have tusks that never stop growing. If the animal lives long enough and fails to wear them down, the tusks will eventually loop back and pierce the animal's own skull. In the case of the blood-starved beast, these overextended teeth suggest that this individual has been trapped in the dark of old Yharnam for an incredible amount of time, maybe decades, or perhaps even a century. It has outlived its humanity and its purpose, left to rot in an abandoned city. It is a creature that has been kept alive by the beast's scourge longer than its natural life should have ended. The movement of the blood-starved beast creates a specific psychological tension. When it first notices you, it does not charge with the explosive vigor of the cleric beast. Instead, it marches towards you with a slow, rhythmic desperation. It is the walk of a creature that is massively emaciated and physically weak, seemingly bearing no internal energy left to rush. However, this slowness is a deception. The moment the beast decides to strike, it displays a level of vigor and athleticism that contradicts its skeletal frame. It lunges with an instantaneous speed, covering the length of the arena in a single heartbeat. It is like a coiled spring that is ready to spring out. The beast utilizes all of its energy for the concentration of killing. This speed becomes even more frantic as the fight progresses and the creature enters its poison-saturated phases. In its final state, the beast moves with so much speed that sometimes it is almost impossible to track. It is as if the poison within its veins is acting as a fuel, forcing a dead body into a state of hyperactivity. The sound design for this encounter is wet and profoundly disturbing. It lacks the booming resonant roars of the cleric beasts or the pained human cadence screams of Gascoigne. Instead, the blood-starved beast produces short, sharp, and wet shrieks. It sounds like a creature that is too exhausted to scream, or perhaps a creature whose lungs are so filled with fluid that it cannot draw a full breath. Every vocalization is truncated, ending in a gagging or squelching noise. It is the sound of a throat that has been warped by the ashen blood, turned into a pipe for bile and poison rather than air. It doesn't scream to intimidate you. It screams because the air passing through its throat is a violation of its anatomy. This auditory decay reinforces the starved nature of the beast. One of the many questions I had with the blood-starved beast was, why does the blood-starved beast poison you? To understand this, we have to look at the nature of the Ashen Blood Plague. Unlike the scourge of beasts that turns men into wolves, Ashen Blood was described as a medical condition that struck old Yharnam long ago. It was treated with antidotes, which are medicinal tablets, but these were only a short-term fix. The poison is not a natural weapon like the venom of a snake. It is a byproduct of internal rot. In Yharnam, blood is the medium of life and divinity. When the blood is removed, or when the host is kept alive in a state of terminal starvation, the remaining fluids within the body begins to ferment and rot. The blood-starved beast poisons you because its internal body has very much turned all the fluids into poison and rot. My theory is that the poison is actually the host's own blood that has become incoagulable and stagnant. It is blood that has lost its life-giving properties and has instead become a host for the rot to take place. This is why the beast bleeds poison instead of red blood. The poison represents abandonment. It is what happens when the divine blood is taken away, leaving only the ashen remains behind. The most chilling piece of lore regarding this creature is found in the ritual hall behind Jura's tower. There, an identical beast is found crucified and chained, with a bowl of ritual blood resting beneath it. This environmental evidence reveals the true purpose of the blood-starved beast in the eyes of the healing church. These creatures are likely the blood saints, which are nuns or holy figures who were used as living fountains for the church's healing blood. The starved nature of the beast is a result of a systematic harvest. They were flayed, hence the overlapping skin flaps, allow for the constant extraction of blood without killing the host. Because of their beastly vitality, they could regenerate their skin and produce more blood indefinitely, effectively becoming livestock for the church. A crucifixion was not a punishment. It was rather a surgical procedure. They were pinned to the rafters to ensure the blood would drain easily into the bowls below. The beast we fight in the Church of the Good Chalice is a saint whose supply finally ran dry. After years of being flayed and drained, it was discarded. It was left to rot in the cellar of Old Yharnam, a failed experiment that the church simply locked away and forgot. Ultimately, the blood-starved beast represents the end stage of the blood drunkenness we saw in Gascoigne. It shows what happens when the hunger for the blood outlives the body's ability to contain it. It is starved for blood, starved for skin, and starved for a dignity that was stolen from it by the very institution it served. Cathedral Ward is the heart of the Healing Church, a district that serves as a primary base of operations for Yharnam's blood ministration. Gilbert describes it as a town lying across the valley, but in reality, it is a vertical fortress of religious hypocrisy. It is home to the church giants and the pale masked church servants, which are beings that represent the high stratum of society. While the rest of the city burns, the ward remains stagnant, its gates locked from the suffering below. At the highest point of this district stands the Grand Cathedral. At the end of the hall, kneeling before an altar that holds a massive beastly skull, is a woman. This is Vicar Amelia, the high-ranking successor to Lawrence and the spiritual leader of the city. Unlike the cleric beast, which leaps into the world already fully formed, or Gascoigne, whose transformation is a frantic explosion of suppressed rage, Amelia offers a more subtle look of horror. The encounter begins with the cutscene, specifically with the use of shadows. As you approach, she's a woman in tattered white robes, clutching a pendant and whispering a prayer that sounds more like a desperate plea for restraint than a holy rite. The transformation itself is shown primarily through her silhouette, cast against the cathedral floor. This is a deliberate design choice that emphasizes the grotesque eruption of the monster from within the human frame. You see the human body literally tear itself apart. The limbs stretch at impossible angles, The spine snaps to accommodate a quadrupedal stance, and the blood splatters across the floor in the altar as the true beast forces its way out of the human skin. The most haunting moment of this transition occurs at the very end. For a brief second, Amelia stops. She turns her massive bestial head and stares directly at you. In that stare, there is a lingering spark of humanity. It is an expression of pure, cornered terror. It looks as if she is fully conscious of the monster taking control of her nerves, wanting to beg for intervention. But her vocal cords have already been hijacked by the scourge. This moment confirms that the girl is still in there, witnessing her own descent into the animal kingdom. If you investigate Amelia's model beneath the tattered robes, the design is a paradox of grace and filth. She is effectively a massive, slender dog or wolf, but she possesses the same antlers seen on the cleric beast. The antlers serve as a visual link to her high-ranking status within the church. Just as we have observed with cleric beast, these natural crowns are a biological mockery of a Viker's mitre. They represent a connection to a wild primordial force that has reclaimed her. In real-life mythology, figures like Acteon or Cernunnos represents the blending of human intelligence with wild animal power. But in Amelia, this blend is not a gift, it is a curse. Her limbs are long, thin, and spindly. This exaggerated design makes her movements look erratic and unstable. She does not have the heavy, muscular bulk of a traditional monster. She looks like an emaciated greyhound or a wolf that has been stretched on a rack. This suggests that the old blood doesn't just add mass, it stretches the existing human anatomy until the skin is paper thin and the bone structure is visible. The antlers protruding from Amelia's skull are the most significant visual link to her rank within the healing church. In the ecclesiastical hierarchy of our world, a vicar or bishop wears a mitre, which is a tall cleft hat that symbolizes spiritual authority, and the tongues of fire from the Pentecost. When Amelia transforms, her body produces a biological version of this headpiece. These gnarled, asymmetrical antlers function as a natural crown, but they are a cruel mockery of her office. They represent the moment her spiritual insight became too heavy for a human brain to process, erupting through the bone as a jagged, calcified record of her status. In real-world mythology, the image of a human with antlers immediately evokes Cernunnos, the Celtic horned god of the wild and the hunt. However, while Cernunnos represents a harmonious balance between the human and the animal, Amelia's antlers are a more hostile makeover. A more fitting parallel is the myth of Acteon, a hunter who saw something he was never meant to see, the goddess Diana bathing, and he was transformed into a stag as punishment, only to be torn apart by his own hounds. Amelia is a modern Acteon. She sought the old blood and looked into the eldritch truth of the church, and the results were these antlers, which are but a mark of her regression into beasthood. If we look past the matted fur, Amelia's torso and limbs reveal a state of anatomical trauma that defies traditional monster design. She does not possess the heavy, thick musculature of a predator. Instead, her frame is purposefully exaggerated, featuring limbs that are long, thin, and spindly. She looks like a creature that has been placed on a medieval rack and stretched until the joints begin to fail. This design choice is fundamental to the horror of Bloodborne. It suggests that the old blood does not simply add mass to the host, but rather it stretches the existing human anatomy beyond its structural limits. Her skin appears paper-thin and translucent, stretching so tightly over her ribcage and spine that the underlying bone structure is permanently visible. This is the look of an emaciated greyhound, a dog built for a speed that its own skeleton can barely support. The horror lies in the instability of her movement. Because her limbs are so long and her frame is so slender, her attacks look erratic and desperate. When she slams her fist into the stone floor, the vibration seems to travel through her thin bones with a force that should shatter them. This reinforces the idea that she is a true beast. She's not a creature at home in her skin. She's a human skeleton that has been forced into a bestial shape, creating a biological tension that looks as if it could snap at any moment. The most haunting layer of Amelia's design is her resemblance to a corrupted bride, a recurring motif in Gothic horror that deals with the subversion of purity and the wedding of the self to death. She is draped in tattered white clerical robes that, in the dim moonlight of the cathedral, look like a ruined wedding dress. Her long ash blonde hair flows over her lupine face, acting as a ragged bridal veil that obscures her slasher smile of sharp teeth. This is the visual representation of her communion with the church. In Gothic literature, the bride represents the threshold of a new life. But for Amelia, she has been married to the beast scourge. The white of her hair and her robes are traditional symbols of innocence and holiness. These symbols become a high contrast canvas for the blood that splatters during her violent transformation. This imagery is a direct insult to her status as a woman of the church. It suggests that her devotion to the blood was actually a form of spiritual grooming, leading her to an altar where she was not saved, but sacrificed. The way she clutches Lawrence's gold pendant to her chest, even as she screams, is the final heartbreaking piece of this bridal motif. It is the gesture of a woman holding onto a cherished memento from a groom who abandoned her. She is scared, cornered, and doesn't understand why her holy union has resulted in her skin rupturing and her voice dissolving into a roar. The girl is still present behind that veil of hair, praying for a healing that only serves to extend her misery. The transformation sequence provides the first evidence of this vocal collapse. As Amelia shifts, her voice does not simply change, it layers. The initial sound is a high-pitched, piercing human shriek, the kind associated with sudden, extreme physical trauma. As the beast erupts from her silhouette, the shriek descends into a guttural, multi-layered roar. There is a specific learning quality to the sound. It mimics the auditory frequency of a heavy fabric being ripped apart. This is not a metaphor. The audio design suggests the physical tearing of her vocal cords as they thicken and elongate to suit her new lupine anatomy. By the time she turns to face the player, the voice has achieved a devastating weight. It is a sound that lacks any clear distinction of gender. In nature, a lioness or a female grizzly possesses a roar with the same resonance and chest-vibrating power as a male, and Amelia follows this biological rule. She is no longer a woman. She is a true beast of the highest order, and her voice carries the authority of that status. The most disturbing aspect of her sound design is the woman that remains audible in the middle of her most aggressive attacks. During her long, energetic lunges, the roar often breaks, revealing a high, desperate wail underneath the bestial grit. It sounds like two distinct entities are screaming at once. The monster that is in control of the lungs and the woman who is a passenger in her own throat. Community investigations and deep listening sessions have identified specific patterns in those roars. In the midst of her frantic swipes, her distorted vocalizations appear to carry the phonetic weight of human speech. The sounds often resolve into what seems like "go away," "get out," or forgive me. It creates the impression of a mind trying to use a mouth that no longer supports vocabulary. She's attempting to communicate her fear and her desire for the hunter to leave, but the machinery of her body has been repurposed for violence. A direct comparison between Amelia and the blood-starved beast highlights her unique state. The blood-starved beast produces short, truncated shrieks that suggest a body in the final stages of a respiratory collapse. Its screams sound like it's dying. Amelia, by contrast, is a creature of immense vigor. Her screams are long, sustained, and project across the entire length of the cathedral. This energy indicates that she is not starved, but overwhelmed. She is vocalizing the pain. The length of her screams reveals a massive lung capacity, yet the tone is never one of confidence. It is the sound of a cornered animal. In the animal kingdom, a cornered predator is significantly more dangerous than one that is hunting for food, because it is fighting out of a purely defensive terror. Amelia is terrified of the hunter, and her screams are a desperate attempt to drive the threat away through sheer volume. Throughout the entire battle, Amelia refuses to discard the gold pendant held in their left arm. She holds it close to her heart, even as she uses her claws to grind sparks out of the stone floor. This pendant is the most important artifact in the investigation of her identity. The gold pendant item description reads, "Passed down from Vicar to Vicar. This gold pendant is the source of the church's healing. It contains a secret that was never meant to be known." This pendant belonged to Lawrence, the first vicar and the founder of the healing church. Lawrence was a scholar of Bergenworth who betrayed Master Willem's warning, which is fear the old blood, to pursue a more active form of transcendence. He believed that blood healing could cure the frailty of men, but in doing so, he unknowingly signed the city's death warrant. Amelia holds this pendant because it is her only remaining link to the salvation she was promised. She holds it dear because she is terrified. She is praying to the memory of Lawrence, hoping that the very man who started the plague can somehow cure her of it. It is a heartbreaking display of blind faith. She doesn't understand that the pendant is not a holy relic, but just a trinket that is passed down from generation to generation of Vicar. The most distressing part of the fight is when Amelia retreats to heal. She brings both her monstrous hands together in a prayer pose. Because her hands are now giant claws, she cannot fully clasp them together like a human. Instead, she just brings them together in a clumsy, desperate gesture. Even in this state, she maintains a sense of womanly grace and demeanor. The way she kneels and lowers her head shows the girl she once was. Someone who spent her life in service to a faith she believed would save people. She's not healing because she wants to win the fight. She's healing because she is scared of the hunter. She recognizes you as a lethal threat. Killing her is a mercy, because every second she spends in that body is a second spent in physical and spiritual agony. My personal theory regarding Amelia is that her transformation was triggered by the player's arrival. When you push open the cathedral doors, you find Amelia in the middle of a losing battle. She has likely spent the night kneeling in the moonlight, using the silence of the hall to keep the infection from taking over. The arrival of the hunter breaks that silence. She realizes the hunt has reached the inner sanctuary, and this realization is the final blow to her self-control. The mental strain required to stay human in Yharnam is massive. Seeing a blood-stained hunter proves the church is lost. Her prayer focuses on the frailty of men. These words describe her own soul. She's aware that her will is fading. Repeating these lines is an attempt to build a wall between her mind and the blood. The blood is already in her veins. When she stops praying, that anchor snaps. The beast simply takes over her entire body. Amelia is a true beast, meaning she's weak to fire and saw-toothed weapons. This is the evidence against the Healing Church. High-ranking members were the most vulnerable to the scourge. The opposition gave them access to the most concentrated blood. They were the primary carriers. They used white robes and rituals to hide the fact that they were becoming the largest monsters in Yharnam. The pendant is a relic of Lawrence, the man who founded the Healing Church. Amelia clutches it during the fight because it is her last link to a promise of safety. She thinks that past can protect her from the present. Even the golden light she uses to heal is a deception. It does not restore her humanity. It only mends her broken beast body so she can endure the pain of the hunt for a few more minutes. Hemwick-Shannel Lane is a valley of industries that sits on the outskirts of the Cathedral Ward. To understand the Witches of Hemwick, you have to look at the ground they stand on. Hemwick was originally a simple farming hamlet, but it was repurposed by the Healing Church into a factory for death. The name Hemwick reveals its dual function. Wick refers to a hamlet or district, while hem refers to both the act of sewing and the act of enclosing. This is a place where bodies are confined and skin is stitched. The road through the lane is lined with grave women, who use agricultural tools like mallets, sickles, and cleavers to process human remains. They are harvesting bones and eyes. The smoke rising from the chimneys in Hemwick does not come from domestic hearths. These buildings are small specialized crematoriums designed to manufacture bone marrow ash. This substance, which enhances the power of quicksilver bullets, is the primary export of the village. The grave women use their wooden mallets to crush the bones of Yharnamites into a fine powder, mimicking the real-world Victorian practice where workhouse inmates were forced to crush animal bones into fertilizer. Hemwick is a Victorian workhouse disguised as a graveyard. The women here are the fallen women of the city, those deemed socially unfit or infected with the ashen blood, who have been forced into a life of manual butchery to serve the church's war on beasts. At the end of this industrial lane sits the witch's abode. While she appears, at first, to be a typical withered crone, her anatomy consists of hundreds of human eyes sewn into her clothes. These eyes are grafted directly into the fabric of her garb, appearing as if they are a part of her own skin. They feature different shades of blue, grey, and brown, proving that she has collected them from a diverse lot of victims over generations. This is a literal interpretation of Master Willem's demand for more eyes. While the scholars at Bergenworth sought internal insight, the witches simply took the eyes of the living and attached them to their robes. The most striking tool in her possession is the ball-like structure of fused eyes she holds in her left arm. The witch has blinded her own original eyes to escape the human plane of existence, and she uses this external mass of stolen vision to navigate the lands. It provides her with a multi-directional view of her surroundings, allowing her to see things a human skull could never perceive. In her right hand, she carries a small charred black staff. It looks like a jagged wooden log that survived a house fire, or perhaps the amputated calcified limb of a giant crab. This is her arcane focus, used to channel red blood magic to paralyze her prey. The specific magic is identical to the techniques used by the brain suckers, suggesting that the witches have mastered the art of fluid extraction. The environment of the witch's abode is a suspicious high-roofed hall that likely functioned as a town hall or a ballroom before the plague. Now it is a dark, empty space where the witches hide in the gaps. Their primary defense is invisibility. They are not actually gone. They have simply attained enough insight to slip behind the veil of reality. This is why the presence of Mad Ones, the soot black spectral entities they summon, is tied directly to the hunter's insight. If you can enter the room with zero insight, the Mad Ones do not spawn, because your mind is not yet capable of seeing the horrors the witches command. This mechanic provides that the monsters of Yharnam are often a matter of perception. To have no insight is to be safe from the invisible, but it also means you are blind to the truth. The witches also serve as the gatekeepers between Yharnam and Cainhurst Castle. The broken bridge near the annex was once the main road for the stagecoach that traveled to the noble estate of Vileblood. The witches acted as scavengers and middlemen. They supplied the healing church with ice for their experiments and provided the Cainhurst nobles with the ritual blood and bone marrow ash required for their firearms. In the basement of their abode, you find a tortured hunter and a rune workshop tool. This tool allows a hunter to etch the sound of the Great Ones into their own mind to gain strength. The witches were hoarding this technology, using their collection of eyes to transcribe the eldritch whispers of the cosmos into these runes. Every physical detail of the witch reinforces the theme of the sky burial. Throughout Hemwick, bodies are impaled on high poles for crows to pick clean. This is a practical method of defleshing. Once the crows have removed the impure meat, the witches harvest the clean bones for their rituals and the eyes of their wardrobe. The bloated crows found in the lane are the result of this feast. They have gorged themselves on the flesh of the infected until they can no longer fly. The witches are the overseers of this entire ecosystem of decay. Killing the witches is a necessity for any hunter who wishes to transcend the hunt. Without the rune workshop tool they guard, you cannot truly harness the power of the blood. Their death reveals that behind the holy prayers of the cathedral ward, there is a supply chain of butchery in the valley below. The journey to the forsaken Cainhurst Castle is an act of crossing into a frozen memory. It begins in Hemwick Channel Lane, a place we already know as an industrial slaughterhouse for the dead. By approaching the massive stone obelisk with the Cainhurst summons in hand, the hunter triggers a scripted event that mimics the gothic scene of Bram Stoker's Dracula. A stagecoach arrives, driven by a phantom, pulled by horses that are already dead. To reach the ruins, the hunter must possess a specific summon, left in the very place where their journey began. This invitation acts as a supernatural key. When you stand by the massive stone obelisk in the fog-heavy valley of Hemwick, a phantom stagecoach arrives. The horses are dead, their skin mummified and grey, yet they move with a frantic speed that bridges the gap between the modern city of Yharnam and the isolated history of the nobles. This ride is a classic Gothic trope, reminiscent of the carriage that carries visitors to Dracula's estate. When you step out at the castle gates, you realize the road you traveled is decimated, leaving the castle as an island in a sea of ice. The horses are now frozen and still, their purpose served. This early environmental detail tells you everything you need to know. Cainhurst exists in a state of isolation and stagnation, a place where the sun never rises and the blood moon never reaches. Inside the castle, the silence is heavy with the weight of an elite, refined past. The architecture is colossal, dwarfing the narrow alleys of central Yharnam. The massive patio, the lush dining halls, with their silver ornaments, and the library of unimaginable size, they all suggest a society that valued lineage and scholarly pursuit long before the healing church rose to power. However, this beauty is stained. The halls are populated by the ghosts of the bound widows, noblemen whose throats were slit during a catastrophic siege. They are trapped in a loop, cleaning the floors or weeping for their lost king. The bloodlickers prowl the courtyard, their bellies bloated with old blood, representing the final monstrous evolution of the vile bloodline. These are nobles who overindulged in their corrupted blood until they became nothing more than a stomach and legs. This is the world that Martyr Logarius came to destroy, and the world he eventually chose to guard. To understand Martyr Logarius, we must examine the fanatical order he led. The Executioners. They were a paramilitary wing of the Healing Church, but their motivations were not tied to the search for eldritch truth or the insight of Bergenworth. Instead, they were driven by a brutal, narrow philosophy of purification. They viewed the bloodline of Cainhurst as tainted and vile, a direct threat to the purity of the Church's bloodline. This feud was likely triggered by a scholar from Bergenworth. Many suspect Lawrence himself, who brought forbidden blood to the nobles, turning them into the immortal Vile Bloods. The Executioner's weapon of choice, the Logarius Wheel, reflects their medieval approach to justice. Based on the breaking wheel, it was designed to shatter limbs and cleanse through physical trauma. Logarius himself was the architect of this violence, a man who believed that acts of goodness are not always wise, justifying the massacre of an entire noble house as a holy necessity. Logarius's physical anatomy offers a profound clue to his origins. He is 7 or 8 feet tall, possessing a lanky, gaunt frame that is entirely inconsistent with the humans of modern Yharnam. His height, combined with his mummified skin and his specific brand of red arcane magic, suggests he is a Pthumerian. This complicates his history. He is a being from the deep labyrinths who somehow rose to lead a human hunter sect. His King Reaper title in the game hints that he may have even been a king in the old world who defected to the church. His face is a hollowed void of mummified tissue, yet he maintains a regal, authoritative posture. He wields a short-bladed scythe and a serpentine dagger, tools that feel archaic compared to the trick weapons used by the hunters of the street. Everything about him suggests a man who has outlived his era, surviving only through the sheer force of his obsession. The martyrdom of Logarius began when the invasion reached its stalemate. While the Executioners managed to slaughter the king of the noblewomen, they discovered a vile secret they could not overcome. Queen Annalise is truly immortal. She cannot be killed. Even if her insides were rearranged and her flesh is ground into a pulp, she remains a conscious, undying vessel for the corrupted blood. Realizing he could never cleanse the world of her presence, Logarius chose a path of sacrifice. He donned the Crown of Illusions, a relic that hides the path to the Queen's chamber behind a mental mirage, and sat himself on a makeshift throne atop the snowy roofs. He became a blessed anchor, a term his student Alfred uses with adoration. For decades, he sat there in the cold, slowly freezing and mummifying, purely to ensure that no one would ever find the Queen or help her birth a child of blood. The boss fight against Logarius tells a story. When the hunter enters the arena, Logarius is a frozen statue. He wakes up slowly, his movements lethargic but deliberate. In the first phase, he plays the role of a defensive caster. He uses exploding skull spells and a homing orb to keep you at bay, reflecting his role as a librarian of who wards off the uninvited. He is passive, backing away whenever the player gets close, a behavior that suggests he is still shaking off the lethargy of his long vigil. The real shift occurs at 70% health. He charges a massive AoE buff that, if not interrupted by a backstab, makes him nearly impossible to stagger. He then becomes the King Reaper, discarding his magic for a hyper-aggressive melee assault. He dives from the sky with his scythe, moves with a speed that defies his brittle frame, and stabs a sword into the ground to create a vortex of homing daggers. This is the warrior he was during the siege, a man whose discipline is a weapon of its own. The tragedy of the Cainhurst story is embodied in Alfred, the last of the executioners. Alfred is a polite, mild-mannered man who hides a core of terrifying, unhinged fanaticism. He worships Logarius as a saint, but fundamentally misunderstands the nature of his master's vigil. Logarius stayed on that roof to hide the queen. Alfred's goal is to free his master by exposing and destroying her. When the hunter provides Alfred with the Cainhurst summons, he rushes to the castle and carries out a scene of absolute gore. He pounds the queen into a fleshy pink pulp, laughing hysterically as he stands over her mangled remains. He thinks he has won, but he has actually dismantled the very barrier Logarius died to maintain. Alfred eventually returns to the shrine of his master and commits suicide, believing his mission is incomplete. He died for a victory that was a temporary illusion, as the queen remains immortal even in her crushed state. Queen Annalise herself is a figure of cold aristocratic arrogance. She speaks in the third person, referring to herself as us and our, a sign that she views herself as the collective spirit of the fallen Cainhurst. She is a vampire motif taken to its extreme. She is trapped in a wretched mosque, wearing a helmet that prevents her from drinking blood. Yet she refuses to abandon her regal dignity. She lures hunters into her service with the promise of corrupted blood, hoping to gather enough blood dregs to birth a child that can transcend the mortal plane. Her immortality is linked to the Great Ones, as evidenced by the fact that her remains can be taken to the altar of despair. At this altar, which is guarded by a Bratus and holds the corpse of another vacuous spider, the hunter can use the power of the cosmos to reverse time for her flesh. This confirms that the Veilbloods were not just tainted humans, but beings who had successfully achieved a form of cosmic biological resilience. Martyr Logarius remains one of the most rewarding bosses because he represents the ultimate cost of devotion. He's a man who spent a lifetime in violence and a second lifetime in the cold, all for a cause that was eventually undone by the very people who admired him. Whether he is alive or a walking mummy is most irrelevant. He is a spirit of obsession. He chose to guard an immortal secret alone for all eternity, an act of goodness that was ultimately foolish, just as he himself prophesied. His story is a warning about the nature of the hunt. If you stay in it long enough, you either become the beast, or you become a frozen martyr, guarding a door that no one wants to open. Killing him is a mercy because it ends a vigil that has lost its meaning, but it also triggers the final collapse of the executioner's line, leaving the ruins of the Cainhurst to the ghosts and the snow. The Forbidden Woods is one of the most geographically deceptive areas in Yharnam. It isn't just a forest. It is a sprawling, overgrown graveyard that physically overlaps with the outer perimeter of the old underground labyrinth. This overlap is the key to understanding why the Shadows of Yharnam are stationed here. They are not guarding a school of hunters, nor are they a random encounter. They are the elite Thumerian guard, serving as the unseen hand of Queen Yharnam herself. To a hunter first encountering them, their physical design is remarkably restrained, even mundane. They appear as tall hooded entities wrapped in heavy black robes, their features entirely obscured. Even a close-up investigation of their hoods reveals only a black void, a lack of identity that makes them feel like men rather than monsters. This initial lack of horror is a deliberate psychological setup. They look like men in robes until the moment they sprout something surprisingly strange. The real horror begins when these shadows sprout their snakes, a transition that reveals the snake paradox sitting at the heart of their lore. The paradox asks why a royal Pthumerian god, beings from the deep, dry tombs, is suddenly infested with a wet, parasitic viper, and to solve this, we have to look at the difference between the shadows found in the Forbidden Woods and those found in the Nightmare of Mensis. The variants guarding the queen in the Nightmare are clean. They use their blades and fire. They represent the ideal or remembered version of the Pthumerian god as they existed in their prime. In contrast, the shadows in the Forbidden Woods are the weathered versions. These are the physical guards who remained on the surface for centuries to watch over the entrance to Bergenworth and the Queen's physical resting place. Over these long years, they were exposed to the vermin and the ashen blood that define the Forbidden Woods. The snakes are not a natural part of the Pthumerian anatomy. They are rather infections that were contracted locally. However, unlike the common villagers who lose their minds when the snakes erupt from their heads, the shadows have used their superior Pthumerian discipline to weaponize the parasite. They have entered into a symbiotic relationship with the curse. They don't just have snakes, they command them, using eldritch chanting to pull giant, nightmare-bound serpents directly from the mud of the grave. The transition from a hooded void into a writhing mass of vipers is the moment the true horror is finally revealed. When the shadows enter their second phase, their arms stretch into long whip-like tentacles that are actually clusters of snakes. This is the grotesque eruption you notice in Vicar Amelia, but performed on a smaller, more surgical scale. It proves that Pthumerian flesh is incredibly malleable, capable of housing parasites and repurposing them into weapons. The black void under the hood is finally explained. They have no faces because their internal anatomy has been hollowed out to make room for the infection. They are literal shadows because there is no individual left inside the robe, only a collective instinct to protect the queen. The presence of these guards in the woods is a tactical blockade designed by the healing church and the scholars of Bergenworth. The church forbade entry to the woods not just because of the snakes, but because they didn't want hunters discovering the Pthumerian origins of their faith. The shadows serve as the gatekeepers of this secret. By the time they summon the massive screen-filling serpents in their final phase, they are revealing the true power of the Pthumerian line. They are calling upon the primordial Yig-like gods of the labyrinth to erase the intruder. When you kill them, you are effectively ending the last watch of the Pthumerian Empire on the surface, clearing the path to Bergenworth and the vacuous truth that lies beneath the lake. The tactical arrangement of the shadow reveals a martial discipline that predates the disorganized brawls of the Yharnam huntsmen. Each figure serves a specific function within the unit to ensure no intruder leaves the grave alive. The first shadow, armed only with a scimitar, acts as a primary aggressor. He maintains a relentless close-quarters pressure to draw the hunter's attention away from his companions. He represents the blade of the Queen's justice. The second shadow introduces the element of fire, carrying both a sword and a candle that functions as a concentrated flamethrower. This suggests that the shadows were not just bodyguards, but sanitizers who used fire to purge those deemed impure or verminous. The third figure operates as a stationary caster, launching fireballs that home in on the target from the periphery. This division of labor allows the group to control the entire geometry of the grave, creating a tactical shadow that envelops the intruder from all sides. The snake infestation that erupts in the second phase is a direct consequence of the area's history with the Madaras twins. These twin hunters were known to bring their beast prey back to the village for dissection, accidentally nurturing the parasitic vermin that eventually consumed the woods. The giant snakes summoned by the shadows in the final phase are the great snake bulls, massed clusters of vipers that act as a single mindless entity. When the shadows perform their ritualistic chanting and surround enemies with a ring of light, They are pulling these entities from the nightmare layer of the forest. This summoning is a perversion of the Maduros twins' relationship with their serpent. While the twins raised a snake with care, the shadows have turned the forest's curse into a mindless engine of slaughter. The geography of the Forbidden Grave itself acts as a historical marker for the Thumerian Ihil capital. The tombstones in this clearing are placed with a density that mimics the burial vault found deep within the labyrinth. These are not the individual graves of human villagers, but a mass burial site for the Thumerian elite who died protecting the surface-level borders. The large stone slabs that define the arena are ruins of a Thumerian gatehouse that once stood as the final checkpoint before the grounds of Bergenworth. The Blood Rapture rune they drop, which provides healing upon a visceral attack, proves their obsession with the Queen's blood. It suggests that their loyalty was fueled by a parasitic addiction to the royal lineage, a bond that only ends when the Hunter's steel finally silences the last echoes of the Thumerian Watch. This removal of the Queen's Guard is the final step before the world shifts. By defeating the shadows, you have officially bypassed the unseen hand of the old world. The path now leads directly to the Bergenworth mansion, where the scholars first attempted to replace their human eyes with the eyes on the inside. Behind the gates lies Master Willem, the vacuous spider and the end of the secrets that has kept Yharnam trapped in a perpetual evening. To leave the Forbidden Woods and enter the grounds of Bergenworth is to step into the origin point of the Yharnam nightmare. This is the site of the original sin, where Master Willem and his scholars first unearthed the old blood within the Thumerian labyrinths. The atmosphere here shifts from the rot of the woods to a more academic silence. Overlooking the water is the Lunarium, a balcony where the elderly Provost Willem sits in his rocking chair, pointing toward the lake with a gnarled finger. To progress, the hunter must commit an act of absolute faith or madness, leaping from the balcony into the water. This leap does not lead to a drowning, but to a transition between planes of existence. The hunter lands in the Moonside Lake, a vast infinite expanse of shallow water that reflects a frozen moon. There is no wind, no sound, and no horizon. In the center of this void sits Rom the vacuous spider. Rom's physical design is a masterclass in alien discomfort. Despite her title, she bears little resemblance to a true arachnid. Her silhouette is more akin to a gargantuan pillbug or a bloated caterpillar. Her body is segmented and bulbous, possessing an ashen, grayish hue that suggests a lack of circulation. From the crevices of her back, strange plant-like appendages sprout, identified by scholars as cold blood flowers. This vegetation indicates that Rom is no longer a biological creature in the human sense. She has become a garden for the eldritch truths. The most horrifying portion of her anatomy is the head. It is a massive rounded block of bone and grey tissue that resembles pumice stone, pockmarked with dozens of dull, sightless eyes that stare in every direction. If you move to the front of this pumice-like skull and look closely, you can discern a distorted human face buried beneath the stone-like texture. This is the residue of the scholar Rom once was. The mouth is a small round opening filled with jagged needle-like teeth, a primitive orifice designed for a creature that no longer needs to eat, but still possesses the instinct to bite. Her movement is slow and rhythmic, a series of heavy twitches and shivers. She has 16 small spindly legs and 10 tails, 5 short and 5 long, that trail behind her like a silverfish. She does not possess the predatory athleticism of a beast. Instead, she's an extremely clumsy, heavy thing that seems to exist in a state of permanent confusion. This is the physical manifestation of her vacuous nature. The title, Vacuous, is an investigative key. In the Japanese version, she is called the Idiotic Spider, a reference to the Dostoevsky novel. This does not mean Rom is unintelligent in a traditional sense. Rather, it suggests that her mind has been emptied of ego and identity to accommodate the eldritch truth. Master Willem believed that the human intellect was limited, and to transcend it, one had to line the brain with eyes. Rom is the successful yet tragic result of the experiment. By losing her humanity and her ability to communicate, Rom became the perfect vessel for a cosmic seal. She serves as a biological barrier between the waking world and the nightmare. While she lives, she generates an illusion that hides the true state of Yharnam. She keeps the blood moon from descending and prevents normal humans from seeing the lesser amygdalae that cling to the chapels of the cathedral ward. She is the cork in the bottle of reality. Her vacuous state is a defense mechanism. Because she has no mind left to go mad, she can witness the Great Ones without collapsing. When the fight begins, Rom is non-hostile. She backs away from the hunter, displaying a level of fear we haven't seen since Vicar Amelia. She does not want to fight. She wants to be left alone to maintain the veil. To protect herself, she summons the Children of Rom. These smaller entities resemble actual spiders, but share her pockmarked armored head. These children are likely the physical remnant of other scholars or patients who attempted to follow Rom's path but lacked the fortitude to ascend. They move with a slow mechanical precision, diving at the hunter with their armored heads or using their bladed legs to strike. They act as a physical extension of Rom's defensive instinct. The horror lies in their numbers. As the fight progresses and Rom teleports, more and more of these failures fall from the sky, cluttering the white expanse of the lake with their twitching grey bodies. Anyone suffering from arachnophobia will have a hard time digesting this place. Compared to the horrors of Dark Souls in Quelaag's domain, this seems like a literal nightmare. The origins of Rom's ascension are tied to the fishing hamlet and the Great One known as Kos. Mikolash, the host of the nightmare, reveals this in his frantic prayers. As you once did for the vacuous Rom, grant us eyes, grant us eyes. It is theorized that Willem and his scholars discovered the corpse of Kos and used the umbilical cord of its unborn child to elevate Rom. There is a deep biological link between Rom and Ebritas, daughter of the cosmos. Ebritas is named after a genus of butterflies, and Rom's design, which is a segmented lava-like body, suggests she is the caterpillar stage of a Great One's development. This theory is enforced by the Altar of Despair, located beneath the Grand Cathedral. At the altar, we find the petrified, mature corpse of another vacuous spider, much larger than Rom and possessing more developed legs. Ebritas kneels before this corpse in prayer, suggesting that Rom is part of a lineage of kin that the Great Ones view with parental or religious significance. Killing Rom is the most significant turning point in the game. As she dies, she does not roar. She simply shrivels and fades, leaving behind kin cold blood. With the seal broken, the ritual secret is revealed. The sky shifts from the evening twilight to a deep, blood-red moon. The amygdalae, the massive multi-limbed entities that have been watching you from the rooftops since the beginning of the game, suddenly become visible. The cries of Murgo, the nightmare newborn, begin to echo through the streets. By killing Rom, the hunter has unveiled the stars, removing the only thing that was protecting the citizens of Yharnam from total madness. The horror of Rom is that she was a mercy. She was a hideous pockmarked monster, but she was the only thing standing between comprehension and collapse. She hid the nightmare because she knew that humanity could not survive the truth. When you slay her, you aren't just killing a boss. You are breaking the world. You are the trigger for the final stage of the nightmare, transitioning from a hunter of beasts to a witness of the cosmos. Rom occupies the same space as the spider goddess at Lachnacha, from the Lovecraftian mythos, a creature that sits in a void, weaving a web that bridges the gap between the dreamlands and the waking world. She represents the theme of cosmic indifference. She doesn't hate the hunter. She barely notices them until they start hacking at her vulnerable sides. Like the horrors in a Lovecraft story, Rom is a reminder that the truth is often uglier and more vacuous than the lie. She is a head full of eyes that sees everything but can say nothing. She is the ultimate student of Bergenworth, a girl who gained the eyes Master Willem wanted, but lost her voice and her soul in the process. With the blood moon hanging low and the state of the world permanently shifted, it is time to investigate the true cosmic horrors that are finally visible to the naked eye. We are moving past the frantic fur-matted tragedies of the streets and into the presence of the entities that actually designed this nightmare. When we find ourselves facing biological catastrophes like the one reborn, a massive mountain of rotting limbs and fused torsos summoned from the sky, or descending beneath the Grand Cathedral to find Abritas, a cosmic god left abandoned in a basement, it becomes completely undeniable that Bloodborne is truly a horror game. The hunt has changed. It is no longer about cleaning the streets. It is about witnessing the horrors of the Great Ones. So step with me into the hunt as we now truly descend into the madness.